Welcome back to the illumilands podcast. My name is Daniel Hurd, and I'm so appreciative you've decided to give this episode a listen. Today, I'll be going over the problem of evil, specifically the logical problem of evil. I've already made a video a while ago on that, but it's a little old now, and I definitely have some different takes on the problem of evil. I have a bit more, substance to it that I can report on in these podcasts. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The problem of evil, also known as the problem of suffering, has been historically known as the strongest type of argument against the existence of God. We think of things like the Holocaust and child cancer, and wonder, how is that compatible with the existence of an all-loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful God? To speak metaphorically, maybe the Heavenly Father isn't coming downstairs to deal with the problem because he was never upstairs in the first place. Right off the bat, when getting into a discussion on the problem of evil, it's necessary to see that such a discussion tends to set off emotional alarm bells before it sets off logical alarm bells. Sometimes the emotional effect makes the idea of God allowing these evils repugnant, even if nothing of any logical consequence has been stated. We can separate then, as others have, between the emotional problem of evil and the rational problem of evil. Philosophy doesn't have much to say with regard to the emotional problem of evil because it's not an argument. It's strongly felt feelings, and the method of resolving the hurt these feelings bring is going to be found primarily in psychology, not philosophy. That's why I'll be limiting myself to a discussion of rational problems of evil, because they can be evaluated philosophically. I say problems of evil instead of the problem of evil, because there are different forms of the main argument which raise different points and are susceptible to different objections. The best way I've been able to categorize the arguments is by making two distinctions. First, a distinction between conceptual evil and real-world instances of evil. And second, a distinction between logical and probabilistic problems of evil. Let me unpack the first distinction. Conceptual problems of evil argue that the existence of any evil whatsoever in some way disconfirms the existence of God. It doesn't matter what specific evil there is, any evil, if it exists, speaks against God's existence. On the other hand, real-world problems of evil argue that the actual instances of tremendous evil in our world, like mass starvation or the Holocaust, in some way disconfirm God's existence. Moving to the second distinction, logical problems of evil argue that evil, whether general or real world, is logically incompatible with God's existence. There is no possible world in which God and evil coexist. On the other hand, probabilistic problems of evil argue that although God's existence might be compatible with the existence of some evil, it is nevertheless improbable. It's unlikely that God and evil coexist. From these two distinctions, 4 arguments can be derived. The logical problem of conceptual evil, the logical problem of real-world evil, the probabilistic problem of conceptual evil, and the probabilistic problem of real-world evil. Holy moly, that's a mouthful. Eventually, I will get to all of these arguments, but for this episode, I will just be going over the first two, the logical problems, both the logical problem of conceptual evil and the logical problem of real-world evil. The logical problem of conceptual evil was first made popular by Epicurus, an ancient Greek philosopher who posed the problem like this. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he's malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? The basic idea is summarized very neatly by Alvin Plantinga, who presents the argument as follows. The following 5 statements are essential to traditional theism, that is, the traditional view that God exists. 1, God exists. 2, God's omnipotent. 3, God's omniscient. 4, God's wholly good. And 5, evil exists. Now, technically, evil existing is not entailed by the existence of God, but we're talking about traditional theism, so the monotheistic theisms, and in all of those, historically, there is a statement that evil exists. The proponent of the logical problem of conceptual evil aims to show that statements 1 to 5 entail a contradiction. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we can lump the first 4 propositions together and say that God just is defined as a being who is omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good. With that, we're left with 2 supposedly contradictory propositions. 1, God exists. 2, evil exists. Now, right off the bat, we can see there's no formal contradiction here. It's not like the 2 propositions are, I'm a human and I'm not a human. Of course, just because there's no formal contradiction here, that doesn't mean the logical problem of conceptual evil fails. The 2 statements, I am 5'9" and I am 5'11", are also not formally contradictory. But we know that if I'm 5'9", I can't possibly be 5'11". The way to make these statements formally contradictory is simply to add the premise, basically what I've already said, that necessarily, if I am 5'9", I am not 5'11". Similarly, to make the logical problem of conceptual evil work, we have to add the premise that necessarily, if God exists, evil does not exist. Keep in mind that because this argument seeks to establish a logical contradiction, the added third premise must not merely be true, but necessarily true. If there's any possible world in which God and evil could coexist, then there is, by definition, no inherent contradiction between the existence of God and evil. So the 3 statements that formally entail a contradiction are 1, God exists, 2, evil exists, and 3, necessarily, if God exists, evil does not exist. Now, evil definitely exists, which means either God doesn't exist, or it's false that necessarily, if God exists, evil does not exist. The proponent of the logical problem of evil takes it that 3 is true, which would entail that God does not exist. So what reason is there to think 3 is true? The 20th century philosopher J.L. Mackie has suggested that, quote, good is opposed to evil in such a way that a good thing always eliminates evil as far as it can, and there are no limits to what an omnipotent thing can do. Unquote. It follows that God, being omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good, would eliminate evil to the maximum extent. That is, completely. If God failed to do so, he would lack either omnipotence, omniscience, or benevolence, and would thus not actually be God. The problem with Mackey's argument is that we know of situations where permitting some evil is justified in light of an outweighing good effect. So it's just false that a good thing always eliminates evil as far as it can. And again, if it's even possible for God to allow certain evils to occur because of some outweighing good, then it's possible for God and evil to coexist, which disconfirms premise 3. To defend premise 3, the argument's proponent would need to show that necessarily there's no possible instance of evil such that God's permitting that evil would be justified. But that task is speculative at best and most likely humanly impossible. Thus, the logical problem of conceptual evil is not a successful argument. It remains unproven that God and evil cannot, in principle, coexist. Would appealing to specific real-world evils help the argument? Well, it does have one very significant advantage, which is that we're no longer talking about any possible evil happening in any possible world. Now we're limiting it down to, okay, yes, maybe God would sacrifice the life of a bee to save 10 trillion people. And so, oh no, a bee died. There's some evil. But obviously God would be justified in that circumstance. But the logical problem of real-world evil gets around this simply by replacing the premise evil exists with specific instances of evil, like mass starvation or the Holocaust. So, premise 1, God exists. Premise 2, the Holocaust occurred. Then, to make the argument formally contradictory, we add premise 3, necessarily, if God exists, the Holocaust does not occur. And the conclusion is that God does not exist. At face value, this argument seems at least a little bit better than the generic conceptual problem, and in one large respect, it is better. Namely, you can avoid crazy possible instances of justified evil, like a beetle dying for the sake of 1 trillion people. Something like that. Obviously, God would be justified in letting the beetle die. But in real-world problems of evil, you don't have to think about problems like that. The claim is that a specific evil is just so bad that there's no situation in which God would allow it to occur. But, again, that succumbs to the same problem as before. Surely it's at least conceivable that God permits the Holocaust to ensure some outweighing good or prevent a far worse evil. If it is even possible that there could be a justification for this, then premise 3 is false. And it seems possible. So neither logical argument from evil appears to work. And now, a word from our sponsors. It's me! I'm the sponsor. Making these episodes takes a lot of work and research, and having a full-time job on top of this only makes the process more taxing. That's why, for those who enjoy this content and wish to support the channel, I've created a Patreon where, For a small cost, you can get perks like early video access and my own personally created Kalam argument map, which is a comprehensive but concise index of evidence, objections, and even objections to the objections related to the Kalam cosmological argument. And when I say objections to the objections, I mean it goes even further than that. It goes to the objections to the objection to the objection and beyond. I'm serious. I've got the way that it's indexed is like so that you have 1, 1A, 1A1, 1A, 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 1A1. And so the numbers are the theistic side and the A's are the non-theistic side. And man, I tell you what, there are things like that on there. There's like 2.B.2.C. Like, jeez. Anyway, now I'm getting excited about my Kalam argument map. I'm also constantly updating that Kalam argument map and adding to it. So not only are you getting access to the current version, you'll always be able to access the most up-to-date version. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. So, thank you very much for watching. Again, it's extremely appreciated. I love knowing that there are people out there who also are interested in this kind of stuff. Yeah, if you're not already subscribed and you feel like listening to more of this, absolutely subscribe. And if you're already subscribed or you feel like you want this channel to go on and you would like to support that, head on over to my Patreon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you later.